There are sayings of Jesus that sound difficult because they are ancient. This one sounds morally impossible. In Luke chapter 14, Jesus turns toward a large crowd and says that anyone who comes to him without hating father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, and even his own life cannot be his disciple. Read in ordinary modern English. The command seems to collide with almost everything else Jesus teaches. How can the teacher who tells people to love their enemies require hatred toward their own families? How can the man who condemns religious excuses for neglecting parents tell his followers to hate them? The usual answer is that hate simply means love less. That answer is not wrong, but it is dangerously incomplete. It can make Jesus sound as though he were merely asking people to rearrange a sentimental ranking. Love your family very much? Just love Jesus slightly more. Luke's scene is far more severe than that. The Semitic background explains why the word can function comparatively. The surrounding passage explains why Jesus chose the most disturbing form of the comparison. He was not commanding emotional hostility. He was demanding a loyalty so absolute that, when every other loyalty stands against it, the disciple must be prepared to let the other loyalty go. The first detail most readers miss is not hidden in a dictionary. It is standing in the road. Luke says that large crowds were traveling with Jesus. This is not a private conversation with a small group of mature disciples. It is a public moment surrounded by momentum. People are moving with him, perhaps impressed by his teaching, attracted by his healings, curious about the kingdom, or simply pulled forward by the energy of the crowd. Then Jesus turns around. That movement matters. He does not continue walking while offering encouragement over his shoulder. He faces the people who appear to be following him and forces them to ask whether they understand what following means. Popularity is growing, so Jesus raises the cost. He does not flatter the crowd. He does not convert excitement into an easy promise. He gives them 3 statements built around the same hard conclusion. Such a person cannot be my disciple. First comes the saying about hating family and one's own life. Then comes the command to carry one's cross and follow him. Finally, after 2 short illustrations about a builder and a king calculating whether they can finish what they begin, Jesus says that none of them can become his disciple without renouncing all that they possess: family, life, cross, possessions. The sentence about hatred is not floating alone. It belongs to a deliberate warning about the total cost of allegiance. That context already rules out one popular mistake. Jesus is not describing an emotion that a Christian must manufacture. The word hate is followed by the disciple's own life. If the verse were a command to feel personal disgust, then discipleship would require self-loathing. But throughout the Gospels, self-denial is not the same thing as psychological contempt for oneself. To deny yourself is to surrender your claim to be the final authority over your own life. To hate your life in this context is to refuse to preserve it at the price of abandoning Jesus. The issue is not emotional poison. The issue is ultimate possession. Now look at the word itself. Luke's gospel is written in Greek, and the verb in the verse is a form of the Greek verb pronounced miseho. Its ordinary range can include genuine hatred, hostility, rejection, or aversion. We should not pretend that the Greek secretly contains a gentle word that English translators have distorted. Luke chose a strong word. The text really does say hate. But words do not carry only one mathematical value everywhere they appear. Their force is selected by grammar, contrast, literary setting, and cultural usage. In biblical language shaped by Hebrew patterns, love and hate can describe preference and rejection, not only affection and hostility. The contrast may identify the person who is chosen and the person who is placed second, the one favored and the one not favored, the loyalty accepted and the loyalty refused. Genesis gives a clear example. Jacob loves Rachel more than Leah. The very next verse describes Leah with language traditionally rendered as hated. The narrative does not require us to imagine that Jacob spent every day burning with active rage against Leah. It has already supplied the comparison. Rachel was loved more. Leah occupied the rejected or less favored position within that relationship. The legal language of Deuteronomy uses the same contrast. It imagines a man with two wives, one loved and one hated. The law is concerned with inheritance because the firstborn son belongs to the less favored wife. The point is not that one wife receives tenderness while the other is attacked with constant hostility. The point is that preference creates a real social disadvantage, and the law prevents the father from using that preference to steal the firstborn son's legal portion. This is the Semitic pattern behind the explanation, love less. In a sharp binary contrast, the one who is not chosen can be described as hated. That background helps modern readers hear the saying without turning Jesus into an advocate of family cruelty. There is also a second gospel passage that functions almost like an interpretive window. In Matthew chapter 10, Jesus says that whoever loves father or mother more than him is not worthy of him, and whoever loves son or daughter more than him is not worthy of him. He immediately connects that demand with taking up the cross and losing one's life. Matthew's wording makes the comparison explicit. The problem is loving family more than Jesus. That parallel strongly supports a comparative reading of Luke. Jesus is not ordering disciples to violate the command to love their neighbors, with their parents somehow becoming the exception. He is declaring that no natural bond can hold the place that belongs to him. But Matthew also prevents us from making the teaching harmless. The comparison is surrounded by division within households, the cross, and the loss of life. Love me more is not soft language when following Jesus may cause the people you love to reject you. This is where a simple dictionary substitution begins to fail. Replace hate with love less, and a modern listener may picture two warm emotions separated by a small degree. That is not the scene. Luke's language presents a decisive collision of loyalties. When obedience to Jesus and obedience to family can no longer travel in the same direction, which claim governs the disciple? When preserving family approval requires denying the call of Jesus, which relationship defines the person's identity? When safety, inheritance, reputation, and belonging are attached to one choice, while the cross stands behind the other, which path will the would-be disciple take? The word is comparative, but the decision is concrete. To feel the force of that decision, we need to remember what family represented in the world of Jesus. Modern Western readers often imagine identity as something primarily located inside the individual. You choose your beliefs, career, city, friendships, and perhaps even the public version of yourself you wish to construct. Family remains important, but many adults can disagree with relatives without losing their employment, legal identity, home, and social world all at once. In the ancient Mediterranean world, kinship carried much more of a person's identity, honor, protection, economic stability, and future. Your household was not merely the group with whom you exchanged affection. It was the network that located you in society. Family name mattered, inheritance mattered, marriage alliances mattered, loyalty to parents mattered. To be separated from that structure could mean far more than an uncomfortable holiday meal. It could mean shame, exclusion, lost security, and the collapse of the social world that had always told you who you were. Jesus therefore names the relationships in widening circles: father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters. He names the household around the hearer. Then he moves even closer. Yes, even one's own life. Nothing remains outside the claim. He is not selecting one unhealthy family relationship for criticism. He is placing every form of natural belonging beneath the demands of discipleship. This does not mean that every disciple must create conflict with a family in order to prove loyalty. Jesus is not praising needless rupture. The saying is conditional in its practical effect. When the claims collide, loyalty to him comes first. Many parents, spouses, children, and siblings may share or respect a disciple's faith. In those cases, following Jesus should deepen patience, faithfulness, service, and truthfulness within the family. But the peace of the household cannot become an idol purchased through disobedience. Luke's gospel has already shown that family loyalty can become a place of spiritual pressure. Earlier, Jesus speaks of households divided over him: father against son, mother against daughter, and members of one home standing on opposite sides. Matthew places similar language immediately before its version of the saying. The Gospels are not celebrating domestic hostility. They are warning that the arrival of God's kingdom does not always leave existing allegiances untouched. Jesus also redefines family around obedience to God. When told that his mother and brothers are seeking him, he identifies those who hear and do God's word as his mother and brothers. That does not erase biological family. It creates a new community whose deepest bond is not ancestry, but allegiance to God. For people pushed out of one household because of discipleship, the community of Jesus is meant to become a real household of care, not a religious audience that meets and then disappears. That point exposes another misuse of Luke chapter 14, verse 26. A controlling religious leader can quote the verse as though Jesus commanded followers to cut off anyone who questions the leader's authority. A manipulative group can demand isolation from parents, spouses, or friends, and call that isolation discipleship. But in the text, the supreme claim belongs to Jesus, not to a pastor, institution, political movement, or charismatic personality. No human leader is authorized to occupy the place this saying gives to Christ. The rest of Jesus' teaching also blocks the idea that contempt for parents is holy. He affirms the command to honor father and mother. He condemns religious reasoning that allows people to dedicate resources to God while refusing material care owed to their parents. From the cross, in the Gospel of John, he places his mother into the care of the beloved disciple. Whatever hate means in Luke chapter 14, it cannot mean using religion as permission for neglect, humiliation, or abuse. The distinction is crucial. Supreme allegiance to Jesus may require refusing a family's demand. It does not require dehumanizing the family member who makes that demand. A disciple may say no without cultivating malice. A disciple may endure rejection without returning rejection. A disciple may establish necessary boundaries without pretending that cruelty is courage. The command concerns the order of loyalty, not the cultivation of emotional violence. At the same time, we should resist the opposite error, using the Semitic idiom to protect ourselves from the passage. Some explanations become so eager to reassure the audience that they reduce Jesus' words to a familiar slogan about priorities. God first, family second, work third. The boxes are arranged, the tension disappears, and nothing has to be surrendered. But Luke will not allow that reading. Immediately after naming family and life, Jesus speaks of carrying a cross. For Luke's first readers, a cross was not a metaphor for an inconvenient schedule, an irritating relative, or a difficult personality trait. It was an instrument of Roman execution and public shame. To carry it was to walk toward the loss of control, status, and life. Jesus is not asking whether the crowd admires him. He is asking whether they will continue when association with him becomes costly. Then he tells them to calculate. A man does not begin building a tower without considering whether he can finish it. A king does not march into battle without considering whether his forces can meet the army approaching him. These illustrations are not teaching that salvation is purchased by careful human achievement. In this scene, they expose the stupidity of impulsive discipleship. Do not confuse movement with commitment. Do not assume that walking in the same direction as Jesus means you have accepted where he is going. The final statement makes the scope unmistakable. A person cannot be Jesus' disciple without renouncing all possessions. The verb can carry the sense of saying farewell, giving up one's claim, or relinquishing control. Luke repeatedly warns about wealth because possessions promise independence and security. Here, they join family and life as possible rival claims. Jesus does not list three unrelated acts of religious extremism. He identifies the structures by which human beings secure themselves, belonging, survival, and property. The disciple does not necessarily lose every family member, die immediately, or become materially destitute. But the disciple surrenders the right to declare any of these untouchable. They can no longer function as conditions imposed on obedience. I will follow, provided my family approves. I will obey, provided my life remains safe. I will serve, provided my possessions remain mine to control. Luke's repeated answer is severe. Under those terms, you cannot be my disciple. That is why Jesus uses language strong enough to disturb us. Hyperbole does not mean falsehood. It is deliberate overstatement that forces the hearer to recognize the scale of a demand. The choice of hate rather than merely prefer creates a shock appropriate to the collision being described. The language pushes family from the assumed center of identity and places Jesus there. Both pieces matter. The range of the word and the rhetorical force created by choosing the extreme term. Luke's hate and Matthew's love more than express related demands, but each wording functions within its own surrounding scene. Matthew emphasizes comparison amid household division. Luke emphasizes the impossibility of discipleship without renunciation. Neither gospel supports emotional hatred as a virtue. Neither supports a casual preference for Jesus that leaves every competing loyalty untouched. So what would obedience look like? For one person, it may mean refusing to participate in dishonesty that protects the family name. For another, it may mean following Christ when parents consider conversion a betrayal of ancestry or community. For another, it may mean choosing truth over the demand to conceal abuse. For another, it may mean rejecting a family pattern built on revenge, prejudice, exploitation, or control. In each case, the disciple is not searching for a reason to despise relatives. The disciple is confronting the moment when belonging is offered at the price of faithfulness. The passage also speaks to less dramatic forms of allegiance. Family approval can quietly become the voice that determines every decision. A parent's ambition can become a child's identity. A spouse's fear can become the boundary of obedience. The desire to preserve an image of the perfect household can silence confession, correction, or compassion. We may never be threatened with formal exclusion, yet still organize our lives around avoiding disappointment from those whose approval matters most. Jesus' words cut through that arrangement. No human relationship, however precious, can bear the weight of being ultimate. Parents are to be honored, not worshipped. Spouses are to be loved, not obeyed against God. Children are to be cherished, not turned into the meaning of existence. Families are gifts, but a gift becomes destructive when it claims the place of the giver. This also changes the way Christians should treat disciples who pay a genuine family cost. It is easy to praise radical allegiance in a sermon and then leave the rejected person alone. If Jesus creates a new family around obedience to God, the church must become more than a weekly gathering. It must offer practical belonging, hospitality, protection, and durable friendship. Otherwise, Christians celebrate the cost of discipleship while refusing to help carry it. And there is a warning for those who use this passage carelessly with vulnerable people. Someone in an abusive household does not honor Jesus by remaining available for continued harm. Honoring a parent is not identical to granting unlimited access. Loving an enemy is not the same as trusting an unsafe person. Refusing hatred does not eliminate wisdom, distance, legal protection, or truthful accountability. Luke chapter 14 does not provide an abuser with divine authority. It removes ultimate authority from every human relationship and gives it to Christ. The statement about one's own life brings the teaching to its deepest level. Family can demand allegiance from outside, but the self makes its own demands from within. Preserve your image, protect your comfort, avoid shame, remain in control. Jesus places even this inner claim beneath discipleship. The self is not commanded to feel worthless. It is commanded to stop acting as Lord. This is why the cross follows the family list. The cross is what ultimate allegiance looks like when obedience passes through loss. Jesus himself does not demand a road he refuses to travel. Luke's story is moving toward Jerusalem. The one who calls disciples to surrender family approval, possessions, safety, and life will face rejection, public shame, and death. Christian discipleship is not loyalty to an abstract principle. It is following a crucified Messiah whose own path defines the shape of faithfulness. Now, the apparent contradiction begins to resolve. Jesus can command love for enemies and still use the language of hating family because the command is not emotional hostility. He can affirm honoring parents and still subordinate parental authority because honor is not worship. He can value households and still create a new family because biological belonging is not the kingdom's final boundary. He can tell people to count the cost because he refuses to recruit them through deception. The Semitic context, therefore, does not erase the offense of the verse. It identifies the offense correctly. Jesus is not telling you to become cruel toward the people closest to you. He is telling you that even the people closest to you cannot decide whether you will follow him. Hate marks the rejected claim when two loyalties become mutually exclusive. Matthew explains the comparison. Luke preserves the shock. Perhaps that is why the saying remains difficult even after it is explained. The modern reader may be relieved to learn that Jesus does not command emotional hatred. Then the reader discovers that the real demand is not easier. It asks whether love for family has become submission to family, whether care has become idolatry, whether peace has been maintained by compromise, and whether the self has reserved a final veto over obedience. The question is not, do I feel enough negativity toward my family? The question is, who has the final claim on me? When family supports what is faithful, discipleship can honor and love them with gratitude. When family opposes what is faithful, discipleship must still refuse contempt while choosing Christ. When the self demands safety at any cost, the disciple remembers the cross. When possessions promise control, the disciple remembers that ownership is no longer absolute. This is not hatred as emotional destruction. It is renunciation as reordered allegiance. Jesus turned toward a crowd that was already walking with him and warned them not to mistake proximity for discipleship. That warning still stands. You can admire Jesus, travel near Jesus, repeat the words of Jesus, and still reserve the deepest loyalties of your life from his authority. Luke's sentence is designed to expose that reservation. So why did Jesus say, "Hate your father and mother"? Because in the scriptural language of love and hate, the words could mark choice, preference, and rejected allegiance. Because Matthew's parallel shows that Jesus must be loved above every family bond. Because Luke's context demands more than a mild adjustment of affection. And because there are moments when following Jesus creates a choice no one can make in two directions at once. He did not command you to love your family less faithfully. He commanded you to love no family, possession, reputation, or even life itself more ultimately than him. Subscribe for more investigations into the original language, history, and context behind Scripture's most familiar passages.